It began with a single headstone in a neglected corner of a cemetery in Lower Manhattan. Not a grand monument, not a pillar of marble, just a slab of slate weathered by 2 centuries of acidic rain and institutional indifference. On this stone, the name was not what the records claimed it should be. The parish ledgers, meticulously digitized by modern genealogists, listed a man named Miller. But the stone, carved with a precision that defies the primitive tools of the late 18th century, bore a name that felt like a geometric equation: Van Thal Erin. It was a name that did not belong to the Dutch. It did not belong to the English. It belonged to a vocabulary that has been surgically removed from our collective memory. Ask yourself why a simple labourer would carry a name that implies a lineage of atmospheric engineers. Ask yourself why the ledger was changed 20 years after his death. This is the anomaly, a hairline fracture in the porcelain veneer of our history. We are taught that names are organic. We are told they evolve through phonetic drift and immigrant illiteracy. But what if the drift was directed? What if the illiteracy was a legal requirement, not an accident, not a coincidence, a correction? When you look at the architecture of our major cities, the massive stone foundations that seem to predate the rickety wooden structures built atop them, you see a physical mismatch. There is a similar mismatch in our bloodlines. We carry the names of trades, Smith, Baker, Cooper, like brands applied to a captive population. We are defined by what we do for the state, not who we were before the state arrived. The Tartarian era, a period scrubbed so clean from the textbooks that its very mention triggers the gatekeepers of academic orthodoxy, left behind more than just star forts and buried windows. It left a nomenclature of power, a system of identification based on frequency and resonance rather than labour and taxation. What if your name was not a label, but a key? In the ruins of the old world, before the Great Reset of the mid-19th century, a name functioned as a social and technical coordinate. It linked the individual to a specific geographic energetic grid. When the cataclysm occurred, whether by mudflow, directed energy, or a calculated collapse of the previous global order, the survivors were not just relocated, they were renamed. Think of the psychological impact of losing your patronymic anchor. If you take a man's name, you take his claim to the land, you take his inheritance, you take his past. The colonial administrators did not just bring flags, they brought registers. They sat in the mud-caked streets of the former administrative hubs and assigned new identities to the bewildered survivors. Not the old names, not the true names, simple names. Names that could be easily categorized in a ledger of assets. We see this pattern repeated across every continent. In the Americas, the indigenous peoples were given the surnames of their masters or the names of the months in which they were baptized. In Europe, the complex, hyphenated lineages of the Tartarian administrators were truncated, simplified, and ultimately erased. The erasure trope is not just a literary device. It is an administrative protocol. It is the process of turning a sovereign being into a numbered ward. Look at the census records of 1850. Notice the sudden surge in generic surnames. Notice the clerical errors that seem to target families associated with the old guilds of stone and light. They tell us it was for efficiency. They tell us it was for the census. But what if it was to ensure that the children of the giants would never know they were tall? Consider the mechanics of institutional erasure. It requires a specific type of silence. It requires the cooperation of the university, the press, and the pulpit. When the family names were altered, the primary justification was always modernisation. The old ways were too complex, too difficult for the new bureaucratic machines to process. But complex systems are difficult to control. Simple systems are transparent to the eye of the state. If you can categorise a man by a 5-letter name, you can predict his movements, his taxes, and his loyalty. The Tartarian names were multi-dimensional. They often included a prefix denoting a specific atmospheric function and a suffix indicating a harmonic frequency. They were descriptions of an individual's place within a living, breathing global network. By replacing these with occupational surnames, the architects of the New World Order achieved 2 goals at once. First, they severed the connection to the advanced technology of the previous era. Second, they anchored the individual's identity to the concept of servitude. You are a smith because you work metal for the machine. You are a tailor because you clothe the machine. You are no longer Vanthal Erin, the one who understands the movement of the air and the extraction of the ether. The knowledge is forbidden, and the name is the first layer of the veil. Look closely at the orphan trains of the late 19th century. Thousands of children, their histories wiped clean, sent west to be renamed and repurposed. They were the blank slates upon which the new history was written. Not their history, not our history, someone else's history. The pattern expands. It is not limited to the English-speaking world. In Russia, the transition from the old aristocratic naming conventions to the simplified Soviet and Tsarist registers mirrored the destruction of the old world's architectural footprint. The grand cathedrals, which functioned as power plants, were stripped of their golden domes, their antennas, and repurposed as warehouses. Similarly, the people were stripped of their names and repurposed as labourers. The institutional gatekeepers will tell you that this was merely the natural progression of a developing society. They will point to the rise of literacy as the reason for standardized spelling. But why did standardization always favour the most mundane version of a name? Why were the names that suggested a different origin story, names that hinted at a global, seafaring civilization with advanced knowledge of electromagnetism, the first to be discarded? Ask yourself why the great families of the current era, the ones who sit atop the financial and political pyramids, have names that seem to predate the reset. Their names are often preserved, shielded from the simplification process. They kept their keys while the rest of us were given plastic replicas. This is the contrast of scale. On one hand, the mass of humanity, rebranded and reorganized. On the other, a tiny elite maintaining the linguistic threads that connected them to the pre-cataclysmic world. It is a form of cognitive segregation. The sombre reality is that we are living in a ghost story. We walk through cities built by people we are told did not exist, using a language that has been hollowed out of its original power. The investigative essayist must look beyond the surface of the text. When you study the change in family names, you are studying the demolition of a bridge. The Tartarian era was a period of high-frequency civilization, where the distinction between science and spirit was non-existent. Their names reflected this unity. Our names reflect our division. Not this name, not that name, something else. Something hidden in the margins of the old maps where Tartaria is written across the vastness of Northern Asia and North America. They tell us it was a vague geographic term. They tell us the cartographers were just guessing. But why would a guess be so consistent across centuries of maps? Why would the sudden disappearance of that name from the maps coincide exactly with the sudden simplification of family names in the parish records? It is a synchronized erasure, a global scrubbing. The evidence is not in what is present, but in what is conspicuously absent. The void where the name used to be is the shape of the truth. We find ourselves in a landscape of institutionalized amnesia. The urban explorer finds the tunnels beneath the city, the sewers that are too large, too ornate, and too strategically placed to be mere waste disposal systems. These are the veins of the old world. In the same way, the genealogist finds the fragments of the old names, the clerical errors that are too frequent, too consistent, and too meaningful to be mere mistakes. These are the echoes of the old world's voice. When you see a name like Silverman or Goldman, you are told it refers to a trade in precious metals. But in the Tartarian vernacular, these names often refer to the conductivity of the individual's role within the energetic grid. They were literal descriptions of biological and technical resonance. By literalizing them into occupations, the state turned a spiritual science into a mundane economy. The transition was tense. It was not a peaceful adoption of new customs. It was a forced migration of the mind. In the court records of the 1830s, we find thousands of petitions for name changes. The reasons given are often vague, to avoid confusion, to better fit the community, to reflect a new start. But read between the lines, these are the pleas of a conquered people trying to survive in a new, hostile reality. They were hiding. They were camouflaging their lineage to avoid the scrutiny of the new administrators who were busy cataloguing the spoils of the old world. The mystery deepens when we consider the role of the census. The mid-19th century saw the birth of the modern census in almost every civilized nation. This was the primary tool of the erasure. The census takers were the frontline soldiers of the Great Reset. They were trained to ignore nuances, to standardize spellings, and to assign surnames where none were officially recognized. If a man claimed a name that did not fit the new taxonomy, it was simply replaced. This is load distribution, not of weight, but of information. By distributing the load of history across millions of simplified, meaningless names, the authorities ensured that no single lineage could be traced back to the source of power. The individual becomes a grain of sand on a beach, indistinguishable from the others, while the beach itself is claimed by the state. Ask yourself, if your family has been in the same region for 500 years, why does your history only go back to 1845? Why does the trail go cold just as the architecture changes from stone and iron to brick and wood? Why does the name of your great-great-grandfather appear in a font that looks like it was printed yesterday on a document that is supposed to be 200 years old? There is an unsettling feeling that comes from realizing your identity is a product of a boardroom. The names we carry are the logos of our historical incarceration. In the staccato rhythm of the modern world, we repeat these names without thought. We sign them on contracts. We whisper them to our children. We carve them onto our own headstones. We are participating in our own erasure. The pseudo-academic language of the history books justifies this by calling it the development of the modern state. But the modern state is built on the ruins of a much more sophisticated global society. The Tartarian era was a time of interconnectedness that we can barely imagine. Their names were not walls, they were windows. Our names are walls. They define the limits of our inheritance. They tell us where we stop and where the state begins. The skeptical investigator must ask, what is on the other side of that wall? What is the something else that lies beneath the Smith and the Jones? In the archives of the Vatican and the basements of the Smithsonian, there are lists. These are the index of true names. They are the blueprints of the old. World's bloodlines. These institutions are the gatekeepers of the erasure. They know that if the common people were to rediscover their true nomenclature, the entire structure of the current world would collapse. A name is more than a label. It is a frequency. If you know the true name of a thing, you have power over it. If you know your own true name, you have power over yourself. By altering the family names, the architects of the reset disabled the internal compass of humanity. We have been wandering in a linguistic desert for nearly 2 centuries, unaware that we are the heirs to a global civilization that mastered the very forces of nature. The somber truth is that the mystery may never be fully solved, because the evidence is being destroyed every day. Every time a dilapidated building from the 1800s is torn down, a piece of the puzzle is lost. Every time an old family Bible is thrown away, a true name vanishes. The investigation leads us back to the silence, not the silence of the grave, but the silence of the deleted file. The Tartarian names were deleted. The records were altered. The history was rewritten. We are left with the crumbs of a feast we were never invited to. As we walk through the streets of our cities, looking at the massive stone foundations and the Roman columns that seem so out of place in a young nation, we must realize that our names are just as out of place. We are a people with a forgotten past, living in a world we did not build, carrying names that do not belong to us. The philosophical open loop remains. If we are not who they say we are, then who are we? If the names were altered to hide a global era of advanced knowledge, what else was taken? The tension remains. The mystery persists. We are the investigators of our own disappearance. Ask yourself, what is the name that was written on the stone before the chisel was taken to it? What is the name that vibrates in your blood beneath the static of the modern world? Not this, not that, something else. The institutional memory of the late 19th century is a masterpiece of selective architecture. It is a fortress designed to keep the past out, built from the very rubble of the world it replaced. When we examine the transition from the Tartarian nomenclature to the modern bureaucratic standard, we are witnessing a deliberate thinning of the human experience. The names were once thick with meaning, dense clusters of phonetic information that acted as a GPS for the soul. Today, they are thin, they are transparent, they are designed to be read by machines, not understood by men. Consider the phenomenon of the Great Fire. Between 1830 and 1890, nearly every major administrative centre in the Western world experienced a catastrophic conflagration. London, Chicago, Moscow, Toronto, Boston. In each instance, the fires were not merely destructive to property. They were surgical in their consumption of public records. The land titles, the birth registries, the genealogical maps of the old guilds, all vanished. When the smoke cleared, the survivors were issued new papers. They were told their old names were gone, incinerated in the flames of progress. Not an accident, not a tragedy, a clearing of the slate. What if the fires were not the cause of the record loss, but the cover for the record replacement? Ask yourself why the reconstruction periods that followed these fires always involved the same standardized naming conventions across disparate cultures. This global uniformity suggests a centralized authority that the history books refuse to acknowledge. We are taught that these nations were rivals, competitors for empire, but their administrative fingerprints tell a different story. They were partners in a joint venture to rebrand the planet. The technical term for this is semantic leveling. It is the process of removing the high-frequency peaks and low-frequency valleys of a language to create a flat, manageable terrain. The Tartarian. Names were the peaks. They were the linguistic equivalents of the spires and domes that once topped our cities, conductors for a type of social energy that the current administrators found dangerous. By levelling the names, they levelled the people. They created a workforce that was interchangeable. If a man is just a miller or a cook, he can be moved from one side of the empire to the other without friction. He has no roots in the soil, only a function in the economy. This is the essence of institutional gatekeeping. It is not about keeping you out of the building. It is about making sure you don't even know the building is yours. The erasure is so complete that we now view our own ancestral heritage as a series of fortunate accidents rather than a calculated inheritance. But the stones still speak. If you look at the lower levels of the massive power stations of the mid-1800s, the ones they tell us were built for steam but look remarkably like temples, you will find markings. Not graffiti, not mason marks, fragments of a lost script. It is a script that mirrors the complexity of the pre-reset family names. It is a language of geometry and vibration. When the names were altered, the script was also banned. It was replaced by the Latin alphabet, a much coarser tool for a much coarser era. The staccato sentence structure of our modern law is a shadow of the rhythmic, resonant legalities of the Tartarian age. We are living in a translated world. Everything we think we know about our lineage is a translation of a translation, edited by a censor who hates the original. What if the very sound of your true name could trigger a memory in your cells? What if the reason for the simplification was to prevent the resonance of the human voice from interacting with the atmospheric energy that still lingers in the old stone? The architects of the reset knew that frequency follows form. If you change the form of the name, you change the frequency of the man. The pattern of erasure is visible in the way we treat the concept of ancestry. We are encouraged to trace our roots, provided those roots don't go deeper than the 19th century. We are given digital databases and DNA kits that categorize us into broad, meaningless geographical buckets: Western European, East Asian, Sub-Saharan. These are the labels of a shipping company, not a genealogy. They tell us where the cargo was picked up, not what the cargo is. The true Tartarian lineages were not defined by modern borders. They were defined by networks of light and knowledge. A family in what is now California might have shared a name and a function with a family in what is now the Gobi Desert. They were part of a unified global system. When that system was dismantled, the names had to be regionalized. They had to be boxed in. The creation of the nation-state was the physical manifestation of the linguistic cage. You are no longer a citizen of the world. You are a subject of the crown, or a citizen of the republic, and your name must reflect your owner. Observe the transition of the middle name. Before the mid-1800s, middle names were rare among the common people, and where they existed, they were often descriptors of lineage or physical location. After the reset, the middle name became a secondary identifier, a way to further refine the categorization of the individual. It added a layer of redundancy to the state's tracking system, but it also served to further dilute the primary name. It broke the rhythmic flow of the original nomenclature. It turned a name into a list. Not this name, not that name, a combination of identifiers. This is the load distribution of identity. By splitting the name into parts, the state made it easier to manage and harder to remember as a singular, powerful sound. Ask yourself why the elites of the current era often use triple-barreled names or complex hyphenations. They are mimicking the the structure of the old world without sharing its power. They are wearing the costumes of the giants they replaced, while ensuring the rest of us stay in the uniforms of the factory. The somber reality is that the investigation of our names is an investigation of a crime scene. The victim is our collective identity. The weapon was the ledger and the pen. The motive was the consolidation of a planetary energy system. When you look at the old photographs of the mid-19th century, the ones where the streets are strangely empty and the people look like they are wearing clothes that don't fit, look at their faces. They are the faces of the newly renamed. They have the haunted look of someone who has just been told that everything they know is a lie. They are the first generation of the amnesia. They were the ones who had to teach their children the new names, the simple names, the names of the reset. They did it to survive. They did it so their children wouldn't be taken. But in doing so, they passed down a silence that has grown louder with every generation. The skepticism of authority begins when you realize the authority doesn't know your name. It only knows your number. The name you use is just a placeholder for that number. The Tartarian era was the last time the name and the number, the vibration and the identity were one and the same. To recover the names is to recover the technology. To understand the lineage is to understand the grid. The institutional gatekeepers are terrified of this. They spend billions of dollars on heritage projects that are nothing more than elaborate distractions. They want you to be proud of your Smith or a Jones heritage because it keeps you anchored to the 1850s. It keeps you from looking back at the 1750s when your name was a song and your home was a star. The erasure trope is their most powerful tool because it makes the truth feel like a fantasy. It makes the evidence feel like a coincidence. What if the Great Westward Expansion was actually a salvage operation? The pioneers weren't moving into an empty wilderness. They were moving into the ruins of a collapsed civilization. Their job was to rename the geography and the survivors. Every Springfield and Manchester in the New World is a linguistic tombstone marking where a Tartarian centre once stood. And every family that took those names as their own became the unintentional guardians of the tomb. We are living in a landscape of euphemisms. We call a power station a cathedral. We call a renaming a census. We call an erasure progress. The intellectually provocative truth is that we don't even know what we've lost. We only know the shape of the whole. The staccato sentences of our modern history are designed to keep us moving. Don't look back. Don't linger on the anomalies. Follow the timeline. But the timeline is a fence. On the other side of that fence is the sprawling, interconnected, radiant history of Tartaria. It is a history where names were not given, they were earned through resonance. It is a history where a family was not a tax unit, but a harmonic frequency. The urban explorer finds the traces in the tunnels, the investigator finds the traces in the archives. Both are looking for the same thing, the true blueprint of the world, not the one we were told, not the one we see, something else. The unresolved philosophical open loop of our names is this: if we find the true names, can we handle the power that comes with them? If you were to discover that your lineage was not one of labourers, but of architects who could manipulate the very fabric of reality through sound and geometry, would you be able to live in the modern world? Or would the weight of that knowledge be too much to bear? The gatekeepers believe the latter. They believe they are protecting us from a past we are too weak to inherit. But what if they are just protecting themselves from the rightful owners of the world? Ask yourself, whose name is on the deed to your soul? Is it the one in the ledger, Or is it the one that echoes in the silence between your heartbeats? The investigation does not end with a name, it begins with one. The 10th part of the puzzle is the realization that you are the final piece. The secret is not in the book, it is in the reader. Stop looking at the page and start looking at the hand that holds it. The name is not what you are called. The name is what you are. The institutional gatekeeping of our identity functions like a lens that has been purposefully ground to a blur. We see the shapes of our ancestors, but we cannot see their faces. We hear their voices, but the frequency has been shifted into a dull, unintelligible hum. This is not the result of the natural passage of time. Time preserves as much as it destroys. This is the result of a deliberate technical interference. In the mid-19th century, a new science of the state emerged, statistics. The word itself shares a root with state. It is the science of the state's assets. 2. The statistician, a name with 12 syllables and a mathematical prefix, is a nightmare. It is an outlier, it is noise. To create a stable, predictable society, the noise had to be filtered out. The Tartarian family names were the first victims of this statistical cleansing. They were truncated, they were mangled, they were replaced by the clean data points we carry today. Ask yourself why every modern government is so obsessed with the standardization of data. It is because the more unique a thing is, the harder it is to own. The pattern of this erasure is visible in the architecture of the dead. If you visit the grand mausoleums of the early 1800s, you will notice a transition in the epitaphs. The older the tomb, the more complex the description of the individual. They are described not by their job, but by their vibratory station, or their lineage of light. As we move closer to the 1850 reset, the language on the stones becomes colder, more functional. The names shrink, the fair. Descriptions vanish. By 1870, we are left with the modern tombstone. Name, date, relationship. The individual has been reduced to a coordinate in a bureaucratic grid. This is the erasure trope in its most physical form. It is the turning of a human being into a head of cattle. The somber reality is that even in death, we are not allowed to reclaim our true names. We are buried under the labels assigned to us by the census takers. What if the great migrations of history were actually forced relocations designed to break the naming chains? If you move a population from a region where their name has meaning to a region where it is gibberish, you have successfully erased their history. This is how the Tartarian influence was neutralized in North America. The people were moved. The names were translated into English by men who didn't understand the original language. A name that meant master of the static discharge became Svek. A name that meant harmonizer of the water table became Wells. The technical knowledge was lost in the translation. The people became labourers in the very fields their ancestors had engineered using advanced atmospheric technology. Not this legacy. Not that legacy. Something else entirely. A legacy of forgotten mastery, hidden behind a curtain of mundane surnames. Consider the rhythm of the modern workplace. It is a staccato of tasks timed to the second, monitored by supervisors. This rhythm is the direct descendant of the naming reset. When your name is a trade, your life is a trade. You are locked into a rhythmic cycle of production that leaves no room for the contemplation of your true origin. The intellectual provocateur must ask, who benefits from this amnesia? The answer is always the same: those who kept their names. The old money families, the ones whose names appear on the buildings and the bridges, are the ones who manage to bypass the reset. Their names are the anchors that hold the current reality in place. They are the ones who remember the Tartarian grid because they are the ones who inherited the keys to it. They look at us and see a population of amnesiacs, content with our simplified histories and our two-syllable identities. The tension of the investigation lies in the gaps between the official records. When you find a family Bible where the first 5 pages have been cut out, you're looking at the evidence of a choice. Someone, at some point, decided that the past was too dangerous to pass down. They were protecting their children from a state that was hunting for the remnants of the old world. To carry a Tartarian name in 1860 was to carry a target on your back. It was a sign that you belonged to the old guard, the ones who knew how the world actually worked. The simplification of names was a survival strategy. It was a form of linguistic camouflage. But the camouflage has become permanent. We have forgotten that we are hiding. We have forgotten that we are wearing masks. Ask yourself, what happens to a civilization when it loses its true nomenclature? It becomes adrift. It loses its sense of purpose. It becomes obsessed with the trivial and the temporary. This is the state of the modern world. We are a collection of Smiths and Joneses trying to understand why we feel so disconnected from the massive, majestic ruins that surround us. We look at the star forts and the great walls and the buried cities, and we think, who built these? The answer is in our blood, but it is blocked by our names. We are the builders, we are the architects, but we have been told we are just the millers who moved in afterward. The skepticism of authority is not a choice, it is a necessity for anyone who wants to wake up. The institutional erasure is not just a historical event, it is an ongoing process. Every time a new digital ID is proposed, every time a database is updated to be more efficient, the last fragments of our true names are being scrubbed away. The gatekeepers want a world where identity is a fluid, state-sanctioned commodity. They want to be able to change your name, and therefore your history, with a single keystroke. The only way to resist is to start asking the questions they don't want answered. What was my name before the fire? What was my name before the census? What was my name when the world was made of stone and light? The rhythmic sentence structure of the old world's legal and spiritual texts was designed to harmonize with the human nervous system. When we speak our true names, we are supposed to feel a resonance. The modern, simplified names are dissonant. They are jarring. They don't fit the frequency of our souls. This is why we feel so much anxiety in the modern world. We are living in a linguistic environment that is fundamentally hostile to our biological nature. We are being shouted at by a world that doesn't know our name. Not this sound, not that sound, something else. A sound that is buried deep beneath. The noise of the 19th century reset. The investigation is not a journey to a far-off place. It is an urban exploration of the self. It is a descent into the basements of our own memory. The anomalies are everywhere. In the way our grandparents refused to talk about their childhoods, in the misspellings on old documents, in the sudden feeling of recognition we get when we see a Tartarian map. These are the clues. They are the breadcrumbs left by the survivors of the reset. They knew that one day someone would start looking. They knew that the truth is like water. It will always find a way through the cracks in the dam. As we move into the next phase of the investigation, we must be prepared to let go of the names we have been given. We must be prepared to accept that our heritage is a fiction created by the state to keep us compliant. The somber, unsettling truth is that we are the children of a fallen empire, and our names are the shackles that keep us from arising. But the shackles are made of paper. They are made of ink. They can be torn. They can be rewritten. The first step is to admit that you don't know who you are. The second step is to start looking for the name that was written in the stars before the light was put out. The 10th part of the script is approaching, and with it, the final realization. The loop is closing. The investigation is coming home. Ask yourself, if you could speak one word that would change the world, would it be your name? The architectural mismatch of our cities is mirrored in the linguistic mismatch of our families. We are told that the massive, ornate stone post offices and courthouses of the 19th century were built by horse and buggy pioneers, yet we are also told our ancestors were simple men with simple names. Ask yourself why a civilization capable of mastering the load distribution of a 20,000-ton granite dome would be content with a naming system that reduced its citizens to a single monosyllabic trade. The discrepancy is staggering. It is the contrast of scale. On the one hand, a global network of atmospheric energy harvesters. On the other, a population renamed Field and Stone. This is the pseudo-academic sleight of hand that maintains the current reality. They give us the physical ruins to live in, but they deny us the linguistic keys to operate them. The names were altered to ensure that the technology of the Tartarian era remained dormant. If the names are the frequencies that unlock the stones, then the renaming was the ultimate act of sabotage. It was the cutting of the wires. It was the silencing of the grid. Not a natural evolution, not a social necessity, a tactical strike. We see the patterns of institutional erasure in the way history is curated for the young. In the schools, the children are taught that names were standardized to help with the Industrial Revolution. But what if the Industrial Revolution was actually a period of managed decline? What if we were being moved from an era of free, wireless energy, the era of the true names, into an era of coal, smoke, and surnames? The rhythmic, staccato pulse of the steam engine became the new heartbeat of the world, drowning out the harmonic resonance of the past. The investigators of the urban landscape find the buried windows and the mud flood layers in every city, from Prague to Portland, and they find that the records of who owned these buildings before 1850 are missing, altered, or replaced by generic entities. The family names were altered to hide the fact that the buildings were inherited, not built, by the current occupiers. We are living in a world of squatters who have been given the names of the rightful owner's servants. Consider the role of the official genealogist. Their task is to provide a sense of continuity where none exists. They are the gatekeepers of the bloodline. They use the census, the manifest, and the ledger to construct a narrative that leads directly to the present. But when a researcher finds an anomaly, a name that vibrates with a different energy, a name that suggests a connection to the forbidden geography of Tartaria, the gatekeepers label it a clerical error. They tell us that the immigrant was illiterate, that the clerk was tired, that the spelling was fluid. They use the erasure trope to dismiss the evidence of a high-frequency past, but the errors are too specific. They occur at the exact moment a family's history enters the reset zone. Ask yourself, why did the literacy of the world seem to plummet just as the printing press became ubiquitous? Why did the names become simpler just as the world became more complex? It is because the complexity was being hidden. The true names were being moved into the black files of the institutions. while the public was given the white noise of the standardized register. The investigative essayist must look at the Great Reset as a rebranding exercise on a planetary scale. Report. Tartarian names were global, reflecting a civilization that did not recognize the artificial borders of the 19th century. The renaming process was a way to domesticate the human spirit. By giving a family a regional name, you anchor them to a regional government. You make them easier to draft into wars, easier to tax, and easier to control. The tension of the modern era is the result of our biological memory trying to reconcile itself with our administrative identity. We feel like explorers, but we are named like labourers. We feel like architects, but we are named like tools. The sombre truth is that as long as we carry the names given to us by the architects of the reset, we will never be able to access the inheritance they stole. The names are the security clearance of history, and we have all been demoted. What if the altered family names were actually a form of witness protection? In the chaos of the mid-19th century cataclysm, perhaps the survivors chose to hide their true identities to avoid being rounded up by the new administrative powers. They took the names of the earth, the names of the trees, and the names of the shops to blend into the new flattened landscape. They traded their power for their lives, but they left the clues in the oral traditions, in the hidden meanings of the simple names they chose. A baker might not have been a man who made bread, but a man who understood the baking of the earth's crust through thermal resonance. A tailor might not have been a man who made clothes, but a man who tailored the frequency of the atmospheric ether. This is the intellectual provocation, that our current identities are the coded remnants of a lost science. The rhythmic sentence structure of the old world's administrative decrees was replaced by the dense, opaque language of the new legal system. This change mirrored the change in the names. The law became a wall of text designed to exclude, just as the names became a wall of labels designed to categorize. The urban explorer sees the no trespassing signs on the ruins of the old world and realizes that the signs are written in the language of the reset. The gatekeepers use the law to protect the physical property, and they use the names to protect the historical property. Both are off limits to the common man. But the investigator knows that the wall is only as strong as the belief in it. If we stop believing in the names we were given, the wall begins to crumble. Not this reality, not that reality, something else, something that is waiting to be remembered. The investigation into why family names were altered after the Tartarian era leads us to a somber conclusion. We are a species with collective amnesia. Wandering through a museum we think is our home. The names on the plaques are wrong. The labels on the exhibits are lies. The historical mystery is not a mystery of what happened, but a mystery of who we are. The institutional erasure has been so successful that we defend our fake names with our lives. We take pride in a legacy that was invented in a government office in 1872. The skepticism of authority must extend to the very word you use to identify yourself. If that name was given to your ancestor by a man with a ledger and a bayonet, is it really your name, or is it a brand? The staccato rhythm of the modern world keeps us from hearing the underlying melody of the past. To hear it, we must find the silence. We must look at the gaps in the records and the anomalies in the architecture. We must ask the what-if questions that the gatekeepers fear. What if the Tartarian era never ended, but was simply renamed? What if the global elites of today are simply the Tartarian administrators who rebranded themselves and convinced the rest of us to take on the names of their servants. The contrast of scale between the rulers and the ruled is not a matter of wealth, but a matter of memory. They remember who they are. We do not. The investigative essayist invites you to look at your own family tree not as a ladder, but as a crime scene. Look for the moment the names changed. Look for the clerical error that coincides with the loss of land or the move to a new city. Look for the missing generations. In those gaps, you will find the shadow of Tartaria. You will find the evidence of the reset, the unsettled, tense feeling you have when you look at an old map or a massive, impossible building is the feeling of your true name trying to break through the crust of your assigned identity. It is the sound of the old world calling out to its heirs. The unresolved philosophical open loop of this investigation is the question of reclamation. If we find the true names, what do we do with them? Do we speak them into the stones of the old buildings and wait for the lights to come on? Or do we realize that the names are just another layer of the illusion, and that the true essence of the human spirit is nameless and untamable? The Tartarian era may have been a peak of civilization, but it was still a system. The renaming was just the replacement of one system with another. The goal of the investigation is not to find a better label, but to see through the process of labeling itself. Ask yourself, what remains of you when the ledger is burned? What part of your being is unstandardizable? That is the part that survived the reset. That is the part that is still Tartarian. The institutional gatekeepers operate under a doctrine of plausible deniability. They tell us that the great harmonization of the 1870s was a triumph of the modern postal system. They argue that as the iron rails of the steam age knit the continents together, the old names, those sprawling multi-tonal descriptors of lineage, had to be sacrificed for the sake of the telegram. But look at the technical requirements of a telegram. It is a binary system. Short, long, pause. It is a system that cannot handle the resonance of a name that is also a frequency. When the Tartarian era was phased out, the family names were not just shortened, they were digitized before the computer even existed. They were reduced to packets of information that could travel along a copper wire without overloading the circuit. Ask yourself, what was lost in that compression? If a name is a wave and you truncate the wave, you lose the harmonics. You lose the overtones of history. We are the survivors of a linguistic collapse, living in the low-resolution version of our own ancestors' reality. Consider the phenomenon of the soundex system, a phonetic algorithm for indexing names by sound, developed in the late 19th century and adopted by the National Archives. It treats Smith and Smythe as the same entity. On the surface, it is a tool for the genealogist. Beneath the surface, it is a tool for the eraser. It tells the researcher that the variation doesn't matter. It tells us that the nuance of the spelling, the specific geometric arrangement of the letters is irrelevant. But in the Tartarian science of semantics, the shape of the letter determines the shape of the vibration. To change a V to a W is to change the flow of energy through the name. By standardizing the sounds, the state effectively neutralized the individual's ability to resonate with the local environment. The staccato sentence structure of the census report is the sound of a hammer hitting a nail. It is the sound of the lid being closed on the coffin of the old world. The investigative essayist must confront the somber reality of the naming commissions that appeared across Europe and the Americas during the mid-1800s. These were not mere academic bodies. They were then there for administrative tribunals with the power to rectify the registries. They targeted the families who lived near the star forts, the families who lived near the atmospheric collectors, and the families who still practiced the old arts of stone and glass. Their names were the first to be altered. They were given names that suggested a lack of permanence, names of birds, names of colours, names of seasons. They were turned into tourists in their own land. Ask yourself, why so many native populations were given the names of the very months they were conquered in? It was a way to timestamp the erasure. It was a way to ensure that every time they spoke their name, they were acknowledging the moment their history stopped. In the urban exploration of the archive, we find the negative space of history. This is the erasure trope in its most visceral form. It is the missing page in the ledger. It is the ink blot that covers a specific surname in a ship's manifest. It is the lost box of records from a specific county that happened to be the site of a Tartarian capital. The gatekeepers tell us it is bad luck. They tell us it is the decay of paper. But why does the decay always follow the same geographic pattern? Why does the fire always start in the room where the old world registries are kept? This is not the chaos of nature. This is the precision of a controlled demolition. The names were removed because the names are the only thing that can reconnect the buildings to the people. If the people realised that Miller was actually Vanthal Erin, the architect of the local power grid, they might start asking for their inheritance back. The tension of this realisation is intellectually provocative. It suggests that we are not just the descendants of labourers, but the dispossessed heirs of a global energy corporation. The Tartarian era was not a kingdom, it was a utility. It was a system that provided light, warmth, and health through the manipulation of the atmospheric ether. The names were the account numbers. When the reset occurred, the utility was privatised by the new administrators. They kept the infrastructure, but they changed the account numbers, our names, so that we could no longer claim the credit our ancestors had built up over centuries. We are now paying rent in the form of taxes and labour to live in a world that was already paid for by our true lineages. Not this debt, not that debt, something else. A systemic theft of identity. Look at the load distribution of modern power structures. The weight of the state rests on the anonymity of the citizen. If every citizen knew their true name, the state would collapse under the weight of 10 billion sovereign claims. The gatekeepers maintain the generic nature of our identities because it is the only way to keep the machine running. They use the contrast of scale to make us feel small. They point to the pyramids and the cathedrals and say, "You could never have built these." And they are right. As long as we use our reset names, we are incapable of such feats. We lack the linguistic tools. We lack the frequency. But what if the name is the tool? What if the incantation of a true name is simply the activation of a technical sequence? The rhythm of the investigation is measured and pseudo-academic, because the truth is too wild to be told in prose. It must be smuggled through the data. When you look at the etymology of common surnames, you will find that the official explanations are often absurd. They tell us that green comes from living near a village green, but in the Tartarian vernacular, GRN was a root for grounding resonance network. A person with that name was a technician of the Earth's electrical return path. By turning it into a colour, the reset architects turned a professional title into a landscape feature. They made the technician invisible. They made the science a mystery. This is the skepticism of authority in its purest form. The refusal to accept the mundane explanation for a miraculous reality. As we reach the middle of our script, the sombre and unsettling nature of the task becomes clear. We are trying to find a name for a shadow. We are trying to reconstruct a language that was designed to be forgotten. The institutional erasure is so deep that even our dreams are named in the language of the reset. We wake up and we are Smith again. We go to work and we are Jones again. But in that moment between sleep and waking, there is a vibration. There is a sound that has no letters in our current alphabet. That is the name. That is the forbidden knowledge. Ask yourself, what if you are the only one who can hear it? What if the investigation is not about convincing others, but about remembering yourself? The staccato sentences of our modern life are a distraction. They keep us in the now, the eternal present of the reset. To find the Tartarian names, we must look into the long form of time. We must look at the way the names were stretched and bent by the administrators. We must look for the hyphenated survivors, those rare names that managed to keep a fragment of their original power by masquerading as two simple names joined together. These are the bridges. They are the linguistic star forts that still stand against the tide of standardization. They are the evidence that the erasure was not absolute. There are still leaks in the dam. The unresolved philosophical open loop of this part of the script is the nature of the reset itself. Was it a single event, or is it a recurring cycle? If the names were altered in 1850, were they also altered in 1350? Is history just a series of rebranding exercises, each one more efficient than the last? If so, then our modern names are just the latest version of a temporary label. The only thing that is permanent is the being that carries the label. The investigative essayist invites you to look past the ink and the paper. Look at the energy that is being labelled. That is the true Tartarian legacy. That is the name that cannot be altered because it was never written down. It was only ever felt. The institutional silence surrounding the mid-19th century migrations is perhaps the loudest evidence of the branding of the human soul. We are told that these movements were the result of famine, war, or the search for a better life. But what if they were a series of controlled harvests? When a population is displaced, they are at their most vulnerable. They are a file waiting to be renamed. In the ports of entry, from Ellis Island to the docks of Victoria, the name correction was the final stage of the processing. It was here that the complex, harmonic identities of the Tartarian era were finally stripped away. The investigators find that the ship's manifests often show a striking pattern. The names entering the harbour are geometric, technical, and resonant. The names leaving the harbour are occupational, flat, and silent. Not this name, not that name, a new name, a state name. Ask yourself why the original documents from these ports are so often kept in restricted access, while the public is given reconstructed databases. This is the load. Distribution of historical guilt. If everyone is a clerk or a mason, then no one is a witness to the collapse of a global high-frequency civilization. The gatekeepers use the scale of the migration to hide the specificity of the erasure. They tell us that millions of names were lost to clerical error, but they never mention that the errors all trend toward the same destination. The deletion of Tartaria from the human record. Look at the children of these immigrants. They were the first generation to grow up in a world where their name was a lie. They were the first to be taught the staccato, rhythmic history of the new empire in the standardized schools. They were taught to be ashamed of the old country and its unpronounceable names. This shame was the primary tool of the erasure. It ensured that the children would never ask their parents what their name used to mean. It ensured that the secret would die with the survivors. The somber reality is that we are the descendants of those who were silenced. We are the heirs to a vacuum. Ask yourself, what is the sound of the word that your great-grandfather was told to forget?